Nyhmnim, you opened up a can of worms on this one.
Your turn, Yugi boy.
What is up, guys? This is AlintheaYoh coming at you today with kind of a discussion and a response to Nyhmnim. It's kind of not a response, it's just more of just a general discussion of my 2 cents on the matter. No, I will not be drumming up any drama here. There's never really drama on this channel. I like to keep well away from that, just because I don't see the point in it. Now, obviously, with this discussion, it's going to warrant a lot of different points and examples and facts, say. So yeah, we'll go into it. So if you haven't watched Nyhmnim's video, I'll post it down in the description below if you do want to check it out. He's basically going on and discussing the idea that kaijus are ruining the game in the fact that it makes it very difficult for you to build a board when kaijus exist. It removes your monsters that you basically put a lot of time and effort into, and it makes it very difficult for you to come back. So my 2 cents on it is that I don't think kaijus are ruining the game. He goes on to talk about how there are cards that exist that are very much like a kaiju. Things like Santa Claus, Lava Golem and Volcanic Queen that basically will remove your opponent's monsters, but at a slight downside to basically you playing the card. And he goes on to say how kaijus are basically free removal. Now, I disagree with the free removal, and it's also something that KAIJUS spoke about in the fact that it is a card that you are technically using from your hand and you are giving your opponent a monster. Albeit it probably, if you're using the kaiju on that monster, will be a monster that has significantly less power than a kaiju. Now, currently the best one is Garmseal simply because it is the lowest attack one. 2200 is still nothing to kind of snub your nose at, but it is easier to get over. Now, the big discussional differences in these arguments are basically that the fact that you give your opponent a monster, but if they are playing something, for example, a Floodgate deck, they still have cards that will be able to disrupt your plays. Often than not in this game, the monsters are more of a first line of defense in kind of multiple different ways. You normally will have some form of backup. So if you look at the way that heroes play now with awesome heroes, they will normally establish a board of Darklaw with Rafflesia, Bahamut Shark, totally awesome, and probably a couple of back row, including kind of the solemn cards or dimensional barriers or any of the trap holes, including the Rafflesia. If you tribute a kaiju over one of those monsters, pick your choice, you still have a lot of ground to make up, especially if your opponent has gone first and established that board, which is actually very easy to do. If they do that, however, they're probably only going to have a maximum of 2 cards for their back row if they have hit their trap cards, because it still requires a lot of effort to go into it, because you have to basically have a hero lives to go into the Shadow Mist to get the mass change. Then you need like a Bubble Man or a Instant Fusion to be able to go into the further plays with the Bahamut Shark, and then also, you know, all these different things, and then have room for traps. You basically have to have the optimum hand, and let's face it, you're probably not going to beat that unless you kaiju over the Totally Awesome and then Raigeki. Then that's probably the only way you're going to be beating it. But if we look at the way that Yu-Gi-Oh has evolved in the way that boss monsters once were, it's kind of evident why kaijus aren't, in my opinion. Now, if kaijus were released about 5 years ago, I would completely agree with the sentiment that kaijus are ruining the game. Back then, there were a lot of decks and archetypes that kind of revolved around a single boss monster, or 1 or 2 of them. Now, you just basically open up your field to be able to do whatever you want. And depending on the type of deck you have, it's just kind of easy to do so. There is no one extreme boss monster in this game anymore. That's why the kaijus really aren't going to be that painful of a thing. Now, if you are playing an older deck and you are revolving around, you know, something really big, for example, if you're playing Venoms and Venomarga and you somehow manage to summon that, when your opponent kaijus it, that's going to be the most soul-destroying thing in the world. And if it was around back then yes, that type of thing would ruin the game, because then it'd be, well, why would I bother wasting my time and effort into getting out one of these nearly unkillable boss monsters for you to just simply use a single card to get rid of it. Now, that does obviously open up a kind of can of worms for the future. If Konami did decide to bring out big boss monsters, and for Konami to decide to revolve around boss monsters once more, then kaijus would be a problem, simply because you're going to funnel all of your energy and resources into getting out those boss monsters. for then your opponent just to go, Kaiju. That would be a problem. Currently, in this kind of climate of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Kaijus aren't a problem. A lot of the times people are running 2 Kaijus in the side deck, and often than not, a lot of people are starting to choose raw sphere mode over the Kaijus because it gets around a lot of different problems. So for example, your vanities on your opponent's side of the field, nope, going to normal summon my sphere mode over your monsters. It also gets rid of multiple monsters. So the issue with a Kaiju is kind of resolved with sphere mode, in the fact that you can only get rid of 1 monster, whereas a sphere mode you get rid of 3 and then you get it back in a couple of turns. I honestly don't think Kaijus are ruining this game. They're ruining any form of kind of sentiment or flow or feeling to how the formats are going currently, simply because the future formats that I see, your opponent's going to be summoning multiple monsters that you still have to deal with. It does unfortunately mean that older decks by this type of removal have been power creeped in a nutshell. For example, if I am running Herald of Perfection, my Herald of Perfection is getting power creep pretty painfully by that, simply because you've just gotten rid of my 1 protectional monster. I still might have other things out, but that's what I've been ploughing my plans into, and you've just completely destroyed it. I, as someone who loves older decks and loves older archetypes, accept that Kaijus are a thing and understand why they need to be there. It's honestly, I wouldn't say fair, but it keeps a lot of different things in check. I still get salty when my opponent will tribute over something I've piled all of my resources into. They just get rid of it like it's nothing. And it is painful, but on the other hand, I think people who are at least playing competitively need to take that into account when making their actual turn plays. If you just vomit onto the field your best monsters with no backup, and then your opponent kaijus you and then beats you, I feel that that's an oversight on the way that you're playing your deck and playing that turn. Now you might say that might be a little bit harsh to say, but let's not forget, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a strategy game, and I really hold that dear. I really do believe that. It is a strategy game. A lot of the times you're not really meant to play your hand, you're meant to play the board, and you're meant to play the possible options that your opponents might be making. That's why I did honestly really well with counter fairies in Nationals, simply because I wasn't playing how my hand was, although you could say you play card demise so you win. It was more, I'm playing my opponent. I want them to be able to think that they can make me activate things when actually they can't. I said this before, but multiple times throughout that tournament, my opponents constantly tried to bait me negating stuff, and I'm like, nope, carry on, and that screwed them up. That's the whole point. You're meant to play your opponent, and if you just vomit everything out, if you just summon all your cards, and then say, right, go, and don't have a backup to how they want to play against you, honestly, that's kind of your fault. Now, this is in no way, shape or form throwing shade at Nyhmnim. Gage is a great guy, and he's a very good friend of mine, in fact. But I just think that in this opinion, I don't really agree with him. Even though I normally do. Honestly, I don't think Kaijus are a problem at all. Now, that might be in itself a reflection on how the game has evolved and how it has technically power creeped Lava Golem, Volcanic Queen, and all these different things, but let's not forget, as Mega Capital G said, they are very old cards, and it's about time things get power creeped. In this game, we all accept that cards that we love and cards that we used years and years ago, they are going to be power creeped. The power creep is always on a curve, and that's just how this game is. And that's how a lot of games are, in all fairness. It's not just Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's a lot of TCG games. Personally, I think Kaijus are fine. I understand some people might disagree with me, and that is completely fine, because it just depends on how you look at the game. And it also heavily depends, in my opinion, on if you are a casual player or a competitive player. Because if you look at it, I believe that a vast majority of the competitive players will believe that Kaijus aren't a problem, whereas you go and talk to possibly the casual players, I think that they will probably maybe, and I might be throwing everyone in the same basket here, but they might be playing older decks revolving around more boss monsters, which does mean that a Kaiju hit is a lot more painful in your plan to beat your opponent. So I want to know what you guys think of if you think kaijus are ruining the game, or how do you think kaijus have impacted on the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now I think this is actually a really interesting discussion, and that's why I've jumped in on this and said my 2 cents, because it is a really interesting discussion, and I do give props for Nyhmnim to bringing it up, because it's nice to see these types of discussions that get brought up in the community and that everyone can talk about it, because I just love hearing different people's opinions on it, and it honestly just brings the community closer together. So no hate on Nyhmnim, please don't hate him, he's a really nice guy. And Mega Capture G and everyone else who has done discussions, everyone's entitled to their opinions, and we need to remember that. So as I said, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think kaijus are ruining the game, or do you just think they are a necessary evil? And I didn't touch on the phrase necessary evil on purpose, because I don't really like that phrasing. I think that it's just something that is an excuse for cards. It's just basically a label and an excuse for cards that you could say are too powerful, but it's fine because it's a necessary evil. It's like how anti-spell fragrance can be classed as a necessary evil for pendulums. I don't really like the phrasing on that, but that's just me. So anyway, I'm rambling. So let me know down in the comment section below. Make sure to give me a like, comment, subscribe, and I shall catch you guys later.